They said I was lucky to walk away from the crash. They didn't say it to my face, of course. It was whispered in newspaper columns and murmured in corridors where the truth was suffocated under privilege. They called it a tragic accident, as if the word could clean the blood from the road or erase what I saw when I looked in the rearview mirror. I remember the flash of white headlights, the crunch of metal, the way the windshield cracked like a spiderweb beneath the weight of a lie. I was the family driver, Mr. White. Just Mr. White. No first name, no past. Not in their world. It wasn't my car. It wasn't my fault. But it was my name on the police report. "You'll be taken care of," Mr. Arlens said, standing beside my hospital bed with a hand on my shoulder like I was an old hound he meant to retire. "It's better this way. Cleaner." The boy was 17. Their golden son, Grant Arlen. Too fast, too drunk, too confident that money could bend reality. And it did. It bent it so far it snapped and wrapped around me like a noose. I took the blame. My license, my record, my freedom, for 30 years. They gave me a small cottage, a quiet pension, and silence. I kept my head down. Drove the other children. Polished chrome I couldn't afford. I stood in photographs without ever being in the picture. I was a ghost in their family, useful until I wasn't. The crash faded from memory. The world forgot. But I didn't. And now, 30 years later, I am retired, alone, and unimportant in the eyes of the Arlens. Forgotten. Just the way they like it. But here's the thing about silence. It has weight. And mine has grown heavy enough to crush what's left of my days. So, I did something I've never done before. I opened my old tape recorder. The one I used to use to memorize routes and engine problems back when everything had to be fixed by hand. I sat at my kitchen table, poured a cup of cold coffee, and pressed record. "My name," I began, "is Daniel White. I was the driver for the Arlen family for 38 years. And this is the story they never wanted told." I spoke for 5 hours. Then I uploaded it. No password. No paywall. No encryption. Just truth. The silence is over. I was 22 when I first drove through the gates of the Arlen estate. The gravel crunched under my wheels like applause. Freshly cut hedges flanked a circular drive wide enough to host a garden party for 50. It was a world I'd only seen from the bus window, brick mansions behind wrought iron fences, winding roads that never led to places people like me could afford to stop. The job came from a favor. My uncle worked in Arlen construction, laying concrete foundations for the same homes that made the family rich. When one of the drivers quit, mid-week, mid-contract, mid-some scandal, they needed someone reliable, discreet, and invisible. I was all three. Back then, I didn't own a suit, so I borrowed one from my uncle. It smelled like sawdust and aftershave. I polished my shoes with the same care I used to polish my mother's dining table every Sunday. Appearance mattered. I passed the interview. Or rather, I didn't make enough noise to fail it. Mr. Arlen barely looked at me. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of posture that told the world it owed him deference. "Drive the car. Keep your mouth shut. Don't touch anything you don't own." Those were his only instructions. I met Mrs. Arlen next. She gave me a nod, not a name, and reminded me of the plastic flowers my mother kept, beautiful, untouchable, and permanently frozen in one expression. Her perfume lingered in the back seat for days, like gardenia and judgment. The children came and went. Grant was the oldest, charismatic, wild, and cruel in that playful way that didn't look dangerous until you watched him break something just to see if someone would clean it up. Lila was younger, thoughtful, and always watching. You learn quickly which of them holds the knife and which holds the band-aid. For the first few years, I slept in the carriage house behind the main estate. Room and board, they called it. I called it a cell with windows. But I didn't complain. I drove. I waited. I kept my uniform pressed and my comments to myself. I drove Mr. Arlen to corporate meetings and weekend retreats where men in expensive shoes discussed land development like they were gods drawing borders on unspoiled earth. I drove Mrs. Arlen to luncheons and spa appointments, listening as she called every server, darling, and every employee by their title, never their name. I drove Grant to parties that started in tailored suits and ended in wrecked hotel rooms and whispered cover-ups. I drove him home drunk more times than I could count. I always stayed quiet. I was trained to be quiet. And yet, I saw everything. I saw Grant hand a girl a drink she didn't want. I saw Mr. Arlen pay off a city official with a briefcase that clinked when it landed on his desk. I saw Mrs. Arlen console a woman in tears one afternoon, then whisper to Lila, "Never marry beneath you. It turns into charity." I never asked for gratitude. I never expected kindness. But there were moments, quiet, human moments, that kept me going. Lila leaving a sandwich on the front seat when I skipped lunch. The cook, Miriam, slipping me leftovers after dinner. The groundskeeper lending me his jacket when winter crept into my room through cracked windows. The Arlens thought of me as a fixture, like the fountain or the marble lion statues at the entrance. Present, polished, and unfeeling. But I felt everything. Especially that night. The night of the accident. Grant had taken the Bentley without asking. He wasn't supposed to drive it. He wasn't even supposed to be home. But privilege doesn't wait for permission. He stormed out after an argument. Mrs. Arlen's voice had cut through the air like a whip, "You're going to ruin everything." I was off duty. Technically. Sitting in the staff lounge, reading a manual on carburetors when the call came. "Daniel," Lila's voice, low and trembling. "You have to go. He hit someone. Dad says to take the car and meet the police. They'll fix it. But it has to be you behind the wheel when they arrive." I didn't move. Couldn't. My heart pounded so loud I barely heard her next words. "He's begging, Daniel. He's crying. He says he'll go to prison." He didn't go to prison. I did. In a way. The family arranged everything. By the time the police arrived, I was in the driver's seat, bruised and dazed. I'd memorized the script they gave me. I was tired. I misjudged the curve. I didn't see the other car in time. The real driver, the real cause of that crash, was in another country by morning. Grant left the next day for Switzerland. Rehab, they claimed. The Arlens called it a miracle I survived. They called it a tragedy for the young woman in the other car. They called it an unfortunate mistake. They never called it what it was. A cover-up. A betrayal. A theft, not just of justice, but of my name. They paid me well, afterward. Generously, even. The pension, the house, the silence. But now, after all these years, there is no more cost high enough to buy my silence. The Arlens don't know this, but I've kept everything. The service records. The repair orders. The court transcripts. And one thing they didn't count on. The audio tapes. From the dash cam. From that night. They thought they erased the truth. But I kept a copy. And now I'm going to play it. The morning after the crash, I sat in a white room with a white coat and a clipboard, nodding as a doctor asked me how many fingers he was holding up. "Just a concussion," he said. "You're lucky. Very lucky." He didn't know the truth. By then, Grant was on a private jet. His wrist wasn't broken, but his image was. That was enough to trigger the Arlens emergency plan, something I'd only heard mentioned once before, behind a closed door, when Grant totaled a jet ski in Mexico and left someone unconscious on a dock. They had a name for it, displacement protocol. It meant blame could be transferred, like money. Or disease. Within hours, their attorneys arrived at the hospital. They came in threes, black suits, gray folders, red pens. They called me Daniel now. Mr. White, even. As if formality could dress up the noose they were looping around my neck. Mr. White, we believe it would be in everyone's best interest if you were to take responsibility for the accident, one of them said, placing a document on the tray table beside my bed. There will be no criminal charges. The young woman's family is being compensated privately. The authorities are willing to be flexible. All we need is your cooperation. It wasn't a request. You'll have a guaranteed pension, another chimed in. Full benefits. Housing. You'll never need to work again. You're nearly 30, Mr. White. Don't you think it's time to slow down? I should have said no. I should have shouted, refused, called a reporter, spoken the truth that was still hot in my chest. But then I thought of my mother's hospital bills. Of the rust creeping into the wheel wells of my old car. Of the way Mrs. Arlen once said, our staff is like family, right before firing the maid for forgetting to starch the curtains. I signed the paper. In ink that might as well have been blood. At first, I told myself it was just one lie. A single, bitter pill. I'd swallow it, let it pass, and life would go on. But lies don't pass. They calcify. They root. Every Christmas, the Arlens sent a gift basket. French wine I didn't drink. Cheese I couldn't pronounce. A card with pre-printed signatures. One year, Lila added a handwritten note, hope you're well, Daniel. I stared at that sentence longer than I should have, searching for sincerity. I never found it. Years passed. The world forgot. But I didn't. I still had the tape. The one the car's dash cam had captured. It hadn't been wiped completely. Arlen's tech guy had missed the backup directory. And I, dutiful, invisible Mr. White, had quietly taken the original tape home. Kept it buried beneath a false drawer in my garage. Listened to it once a year like a man rereading the last letter from someone who betrayed him. I still remember the sound of Grant's voice slurring. The moment he screamed when the tires hit the shoulder. The woman's voice, just a gasp, a half-syllable that ends in silence. That silence haunted me. And yet I stayed. For 30 years, I nodded and smiled when strangers said, "You're lucky it wasn't worse." When the Arlens posed for magazine spreads, building schools and funding scholarships with the money they used to buy my guilt, I applauded with the rest. But then, something shifted. It was last fall. I'd had a minor stroke, nothing dramatic, just a flicker, a warning. I spent a week in a quiet recovery center, staring at a beige ceiling, wondering if I'd leave this world with their lie tattooed to my name. That's when I saw him. Grant Arlen. On TV. Older now, but still with that same self-satisfied smirk. He was being honored at a gala, the Arlen Foundation Award for Ethics in Engineering. I watched him accept a trophy and thank his parents for raising him to value accountability above all. That word. Accountability. It echoed like a gunshot in my head. He smiled into the camera. Somewhere beneath that smile, the blood of a young woman still stained his hands. Somewhere behind the tuxedo and the trust fund and the charity speeches, was the same boy who cried and begged and let another man carry his shame. And I realized, I had stayed silent for his comfort. Not mine. Never mine. The betrayal wasn't just what they did that night. It was everything after. The silence they fed me. The lies they handed me. The identity they took from me, one paycheck at a time. The worst part? They believed I was grateful. That I owed them. That I was too small, too poor, too voiceless to matter. That's the thing about people like the Arlens. They believe control equals safety. That their secrets are buried so deep the truth can never reach the surface. But they forgot one thing. I know how to drive through anything. Even fire. And now, I'm done driving for them. I'm driving the truth. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the recorder. Not pressing play. Not rewinding. Just, staring. The same table I'd sanded smooth 20 years ago, after the pension check started arriving. I'd thought I was building a life, simple, quiet, safe. But what I'd really built was a cage. The house they gave me was clean, comfortable, tucked behind a line of pine trees where no one would ask questions. It had a porch, a modest lawn, even a view of the reservoir if you stood on tiptoe from the back window. But it wasn't a gift. It was a perimeter. I realized I hadn't truly spoken in days. The kind of speaking that matters. Not small talk with the grocery clerk. Not a polite nod to the mailman. But the kind of voice that comes from the deepest part of you, the place where truths grow like old, gnarled roots. Mine had been buried so long I wasn't sure they'd survived. The night Grant took that girl's life, mine ended too. Not in blood or metal or shattered glass. But in the quiet. That's what betrayal does when it doesn't kill you, it silences you. It makes you doubt your own memory. Your own anger. Your own worth. You begin to tell yourself things like, maybe this is the best I can do. Maybe they're not so bad. Maybe I was lucky. But I wasn't lucky. I was used. Every breath I took afterward was filtered through the memory of that moment. The crash. The blood. The begging. The lies. And I became smaller every year. I'd saved my mother's letters in a box under the bed. I pulled them out that week and read them again, her slanted handwriting a tether to a past where I mattered for who I was, not what I could carry for someone else. Daniel, I'm proud of you. You always try to do right, even when it's hard. That's what makes you a man, not the job or the pay. Don't let anyone tell you different. She died before the accident. Never saw the way I folded into their lie. Never heard my name on the news. I'm glad. Because I don't think I could have looked her in the eye and told her I said yes. After the stroke, the doctor asked me if I had a support system. I almost laughed. I had neighbors, sure. Acquaintances. A handyman I tipped extra during winter. But no one who knew me. Not really. The Arlens made sure of that. They kept me just fed enough, just housed enough, just distantly, included, enough to make me think I wasn't forgotten. But I was. Every birthday passed without a call. Every holiday brought a box with their names pre-printed. Every attempt at connection from me, ignored. I once wrote to Lila. A simple card, nothing dramatic. Just, hope you're well. I missed those quiet rides to your piano lessons. You were always the gentle one. I never got a reply. I told myself she probably never saw it. But somewhere deep down, I knew she did. The betrayal wasn't a single knife, it was 1,000 paper cuts. The years where they could have made it right. Could have said, we owe you everything. Could have faced the truth like people instead of ghosts hiding behind wealth. But they didn't. They buried me alive in politeness and pretended it was a reward. I didn't cry when I recorded the tape. But I did cry the night before. Not loud. Not the kind of crying that tears you apart. It was quieter than that. More like, water slipping down a sink. Silent. Continuous. I cried for the years I lost. For the man I was supposed to be. For the girl in that other car. For the fact that no one ever spoke her name to me again. Her name was Marianne Choi. I looked her up recently. 22 years old. Graduate student. Violinist. The only daughter of 2 immigrants who worked 3 jobs to put her through school. She was on her way to a friend's birthday dinner when Grant's car crossed the median. They settled with her parents quietly. The Arlens attorneys handled everything. I wasn't allowed to attend the hearing. But I never forgot her name. For years, I set a place for her on her birthday. A tradition no one knew about. One extra plate. One candle. One moment of silence where I whispered an apology into the air. I don't know if her parents are still alive. But if they are, I hope this story reaches them. I hope they know someone else remembered. Someone else cared. When I finally stood up from that kitchen table, something had shifted inside me. I didn't feel brave. I felt empty. But emptiness can be fertile ground. It's where something new can grow. And that night, for the first time in 30 years, I opened the box with the tape. The original. The one I'd kept hidden all this time. I didn't press play. Not yet. Instead, I placed it beside my recorder. Took out a notepad. And began writing my story, not as an apology, not as a plea for sympathy, but as a reclamation. I had spent 3 decades shrinking myself to fit inside someone else's lie. Now, I was building a story big enough to contain the truth. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to begin again. It began with a list. Just ink on a yellow legal pad, names, dates, places. Not accusations. Not yet. Just memories drawn into shape. I wrote Grant Arlen at the top. Then beneath that, I wrote, August 14, 1995, crash on Hemlock Hill. Then, Marianne Choi. 22. Killed on impact. No charges filed. I circled her name. Next came the dash cam tape, and beneath that, the folder numbers I'd memorized long ago. I opened the cassette and rewound the tape, not to listen, just to feel it click into place. 30 years I'd kept it in the false drawer behind the toolbox in my garage. I'd opened that drawer 100 times. But this was the first time with purpose. I went through my boxes. Notebooks from the early days. Tax records. Appointment logs. Handwritten service reports for every vehicle I'd ever driven for the Arlens. Some signed by Grant. Some marked, do not file, the kinds of records you kept in case you were ever asked to forget what you saw. There was the accident report. The insurance claim. My own signature at the bottom, steady even then. I looked at it like it belonged to a stranger. I made 3 copies of everything. One for myself. One for a lawyer I hadn't called yet. And one to be mailed anonymously, just in case. Then I did the thing they never expected. I called an audio engineer. He was younger than I imagined, maybe late 20s, with a quiet voice and a curiosity that made him dangerous to secrets. I told him I had an old tape, historical, I said, and I needed it digitized. I paid in cash. 2 days later, he handed me a USB drive and said, "This is clean. If you're going to use it publicly, you'll want a second copy, just to be safe." I nodded and took the drive home. Slipped it into my laptop and pressed play. The sound quality wasn't perfect. But the voices were clear. "Grant, she came out of nowhere, man, I didn't see, oh God, what do I do? What do I, Dad? Dad." Then Mr. Arlen's voice, "Shut up. You don't say a word. We'll fix this. I'll call Daniel." Then silence. Tire noise. Panic breathing. And then mine, what did you do? "Grant, please, I can't go to jail, Daniel. Please." The rest was static. But it was enough. Enough to prove I hadn't been driving. Enough to show premeditated cover-up. Enough to expose everything they'd buried. That night, I sat in the center of my living room, lights off, just the glow of the screen playing back that terrible night. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just listened. And when the tape ended, I clicked upload. I posted it to 3 places, a cloud storage drive, a backup email address, and an audio forum for journalism students looking for real-world materials. Then I wrote a short caption. This is a statement made after 30 years of silence. I was the driver for the Arlen family. In 1995, their son killed a woman. I was forced to take the blame. This is the original recording from the car's dash cam, never released to the public. My name is Daniel White. And I have nothing left to lose. I didn't promote it. I didn't send it to a reporter. I let the truth find its own path. Then I unplugged the laptop and went for a walk. It was dusk. The kind of fading light that makes every shadow look like a memory. I walked past the bench where I used to sit with Miriam, the Arlens' old cook, eating sandwiches in silence on her smoke break. Past the school where the neighborhood kids never knew my name but waved anyway. Past the life I thought was mine. I walked until my legs ached and the silence in my chest cracked open just wide enough to let something new in. Not joy. Not anger. Just clarity. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't going to confront them. I didn't need to. Because truth, when it finally finds air, speaks louder than rage. And the truth was finally out. The first sign that the recording had found its way into the world came quietly, just like I had hoped. It started with a comment. Then 10. Then 50. Within 3 days, the forum where I had uploaded the audio had pinned it to the top. A user named JournalJunkie84 tagged it, "Best real-world case study in media manipulation I've ever heard." Another simply wrote, "This voice has weight." Someone uploaded the audio to YouTube. I hadn't done it myself, I didn't want to draw attention in a way that seemed strategic or bitter. But someone else saw what I saw, a man telling the truth, finally. They paired the audio with a static image, just the words, "I was silent for 30 years." And then turned on the mic. That video reached 1,000 views in a day. 10,000 in 2. And then, someone recognized the voice. Not mine. Grant's. Reddit threads popped up. The Arlen name was mentioned. People cross-referenced the date of the accident with local news archives. Someone found the obituary for Marianne Choi. Someone else unearthed a copy of the original police report, my name on the bottom, her name in the middle, no charges filed. Someone connected the dots. The Arlens didn't respond. Not at first. They underestimated how fast quiet things spread when they carry the scent of justice. I didn't call them. I didn't need to. My silence now was not cowardice, it was strategy. I waited. On day 5, the Arlen Foundation's website crashed. Too much traffic. Too many comments under their press releases. Is this the same Grant Arlen from the Hemlock Hill accident? Why is a man on tape begging not to go to jail while someone else takes the fall? By day 7, a journalist emailed me. Her name was Anna. Young, persistent, and calm in a way that told me she was used to power denying her access. "I don't want to sensationalize your story, Mr. White," she wrote. "I want to help you tell it the way it should have been told the first time." I didn't respond immediately. Not because I was unsure, but because I'd spent 30 years being used. I needed to know if she understood the difference between a source and a story. She followed up 3 days later. I found the name Marianne Choi. I found the discrepancies. I believe you. I also believe the Arlens are preparing a counter-narrative. If you don't tell the truth now, they'll rewrite it. That was the sentence that made me say yes. I gave her the documents. The tape. The letters. Everything I had. But I gave her one condition. No confrontation. I'm not trying to destroy them. I just want the lie to stop echoing in my name. She agreed. The article dropped on a Tuesday. The driver's story, what Daniel White saw on Hemlock Hill. No capital letters shouting for attention. No blood-red banners. Just quiet, clear words. And that's all I needed. Subtle revenge is colder than anger. More honest than theatrics. I didn't need the Arlens to go to prison. I didn't need apologies. I didn't even need their name ruined. I needed my own restored. That happened when the first real comment appeared under Anna's article. My dad knew Mr. White. Said he was the most reliable man he ever met. Said he was quiet, but always watching. I believe him. More followed. A fund was started, not by me, but by strangers who thought I deserved something better than the quiet life I'd been paid into. I shut it down. Gratefully. I didn't want donations. I wanted distance. And I got it. Because while the Arlens fumbled behind locked gates and legal teams, I walked down the street for groceries for the first time in years without wondering if someone saw me as that driver. People nodded now. Quiet nods. Respectful ones. The kind you offer a man who carried something for far too long. One evening, a young woman approached me outside the post office. Are you Daniel White? She asked. I hesitated. Then nodded. She handed me an envelope. I think you should have this. Inside was a photograph of Marianne Choi. From her graduation. Smiling. Full of life. A note was clipped to the back. Thank you for remembering her name. Her family never forgot. Neither did her friends. You weren't alone. That was it. That was all I needed. The Arlens tried, briefly, to deny it all. Then, they tried to redirect the story, claiming my age, my health, my motives. But they couldn't erase the tape. They couldn't silence the voice they'd paid to keep buried. Subtle revenge is never about volume. It's about clarity. And now, the truth was loud in all the places their silence used to be. The Arlens didn't fall in a single day. People like them rarely do. It happens the way trees fall in storms, they groan, they splinter, they resist. But once the rot is exposed, the weight of their own design brings them down. The first tremor came from within. A board member resigned from the Arlen Foundation. Quietly, at first. But Anna's article had included enough source documents, copies of checks, audio timestamps, legal records, that even silence began to sound like complicity. 2 more board members left the next week. One made a statement. Accountability must exist even among the powerful. Especially among them. Then came the universities. Grant had sat on advisory panels for 2 engineering departments. Both issued reviews. Both placed his memberships under reconsideration. By the end of the month, his name had been removed from one entirely. No statement. Just absence. The most damning kind of reply. Mrs. Arlen, who once commanded entire charity circuits with a single invitation, was uninvited from 2 gala committees. One venue changed their calendar title from Arlen Gala for Arts to Midwinter Circle Benefit. Subtle. Devastating. Mr. Arlen's business faced more than PR fallout. Old partners began reviewing their contracts. Not because of my tape, but because the tape reminded them of the culture behind the curtain. Arlen Developments had thrived on unspoken rules. But now people were speaking. Former employees. Ex-consultants. Whistleblowers who once felt too small to matter. And just like that, silence lost its grip. The media didn't hound them. That would have been too easy. What happened instead was worse. They were erased. Photos pulled from websites. Names redacted from donor walls. Plaques replaced. Foundations restructured. People who once name-dropped the Arlens at brunch now acted like they'd never heard of them. Their power wasn't taken, it evaporated. Grant went offline. Deleted his social media. Resigned from his family's board. Moved to a private estate in Vermont, according to someone Anna spoke to. When asked for comment, his spokesperson declined. Mr. Arlen is focusing on personal healing. Ironic. 30 years I spent cleaning up after his mistakes. And now, when the world finally saw who he was, he claimed the luxury of recovery. Mrs. Arlen released a single written statement. Our family regrets any pain caused by past events. We deeply value privacy during this time. No names. No admissions. No remorse. But you could hear the fear beneath the polish. What do you say when the servant speaks? They never planned for that. A few people tried to defend them. One wrote a column titled, "Don't Cancel a Family Over One Mistake." The comments were brutal. Another said I should have kept quiet, out of dignity. But dignity isn't silence. Dignity is telling the truth when no one else will. One man, a retired city planner who'd worked with Mr. Arlen on zoning projects, wrote a letter to the editor. Daniel White didn't speak to destroy a legacy. He spoke to reclaim his name. There is no timeline on truth. That letter was framed in my new living room. Yes, new. After the article and its fallout, I sold the house. Not out of fear. Out of choice. That place was never mine. It was a holding cell with nice curtains. I used the money from the sale and moved across the state. Found a quiet apartment near a lake. I walk now, every morning. No schedules. No horns. No uniforms. Sometimes I pass people on their porches, sipping coffee. They nod. I nod back. I don't think they know who I am. And that's the beautiful part. I'm not the driver. Not the cover-up. Not the loyal employee. I'm just Daniel White. No longer holding anyone else's story. It was never about revenge. Not really. What I wanted, what I waited 30 years for, was a single conversation. Not with the world. Not with a courtroom. With them. I didn't think it would happen. After the tape, after the articles, after their name was no longer whispered with reverence, I assumed they'd retreat entirely. Into their estate. Into their privilege. Into whatever echo chamber wealthy people build when they want to forget the damage they've caused. But then I received a letter. A white envelope, no return address. Just my name, typed clean across the front, Mr. Daniel White. Inside, a folded page on thick paper. Daniel, we request a private meeting. No cameras. No media. Just a conversation. One final word between old acquaintances. L.A. L. Lila Arlen. Not Grant. Not their lawyers. Lila. The one I remembered as quiet. Watchful. The one who used to leave sandwiches on the front seat when I missed lunch. She hadn't spoken a word to me in decades. Until now. I didn't respond. Instead, I showed up. Their estate hadn't changed. Same gate. Same lion statues. Same perfect silence. The security guard barely glanced at me. I was still in the system. My name still triggered access. Fitting. I parked the way I always used to, driver's side facing the hedges, tires aligned to the gravel edge. Some habits don't die. They sleep. Lila was waiting on the porch. She wore black, not mourning, not formal. Just, neutral. Her hair had gone silver at the edges. Her face was softer than I remembered. But her eyes? Still sharp. Still scanning. We didn't shake hands. She gestured to 2 chairs. No servants. No glass of water. No barrier of politeness. Just the truth, finally unfiltered. Thank you for coming, she said. I didn't respond. She nodded, as if she expected the silence. You want an apology, she continued, but I don't know if I have one that matters anymore. Still, I said nothing. She looked away. Down at her hands. I knew. That night. I knew Grant wasn't the one who should have taken the fall. But I didn't stop it. I was 16. I told myself I didn't have the power. But I did. And I didn't use it. Silence stretched between us like a bridge we were too scared to walk. You wrote to me once, she added. I kept the card. I didn't answer. I should have. I finally spoke. You could have said my name in any room. You never did. She flinched, not dramatically, just a shift in her jaw. You're right, she said. A pause. A breath. Grant, he's not well, she said. He's lost everything. The board seats. The partnerships. The speeches. But he still doesn't see the loss. I looked at her. For the first time, really looked. She wasn't making excuses. She was confessing. I didn't come for him, I said quietly. I didn't publish the tape for revenge. I did it so that when I die, my name isn't buried under someone else's lie. Lila nodded. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it. What do you want from us? She asked. I waited. Then I said, I want the Arlen Foundation renamed. She looked up, startled. I want it named after Marianne Choi. Her lips parted, surprise or resistance, I wasn't sure. She died, I said, and you turned her into a line in a closed file. A hush payment. A tragedy. You can't fix the past. But you can stop erasing her. Lila was silent for a long time. Then she said, I'll do it. No debate. No compromise. I'll talk to the trustees. I'll cover the legal costs if I have to. The Marianne Choi Fellowship Fund. For women in music. In her name. That was it. Not a performance. Not a press release. A promise. I stood to leave. But before I turned, I said, you were the only one who ever saw me. Lila blinked. And I still remember, I added, that you did nothing. I walked away before she could respond. Because this wasn't about punishment. It was about ending things honestly. I left the Arlen estate that day for the last time, not as a man erased by their history, but as one who had rewritten it. The first morning I woke up after the confrontation, I didn't reach for the tape. That was new. For 30 years, I'd started every day with the same rituals, breakfast alone, a short walk if the weather held, and always, a glance at the garage drawer. Just to check the tape was still there. As if it were some relic holding the last of my voice. But now, it was gone. Uploaded. Shared. Heard. And in its absence, I found breath again. I moved into a lakeside apartment shortly after. Not because I had to, but because I could. It was small, modest, warm. A place I picked, paid for, and furnished myself. No legacy attached. No hush money. No silence hanging in the corners. The landlord was a woman in her 60s who reminded me of my mother. Stern but kind. She asked me what I did for a living. I said, I used to drive for a family. Now I just live. She smiled. The days passed gently. I filled them with slow walks, worn paperbacks, and long afternoons listening to old music, not the kind piped through radio stations, but the quiet kind. Nina Simone. Bill Evans. Clara Schumann. I think Marianne Choi would have liked those. Sometimes I played her graduation video again. Just to hear her name in someone else's voice. The story faded from the headlines. That's how the world works. What is urgent becomes background. What is scandal becomes archived. But the difference now? I didn't fade with it. I was no longer a footnote to their narrative. I was the headline in my own. And that small shift changed everything. One afternoon, Anna sent me a package. Inside, a hardbound copy of her article, framed in leather. Beneath it, a card. You told the truth so others might breathe easier. That's legacy. She didn't sign it with a title. Just her name. Like friends do. I never went looking for accolades. I didn't want attention. But in my mailbox, now and then, letters arrived. Some from strangers. One from Marianne's cousin. She was gentle, but fierce. She would have liked you. That one I kept. I started writing, slowly. Nothing formal. Just reflections. Thoughts. I'd never considered my words worth anything. The Arlens had made sure of that. But now, people asked. A small university invited me to speak to ethics students. I said no at first. But then I remembered how many young men like Grant still existed, polished, protected, prepared to rewrite their mistakes with someone else's pen. So I said yes. The classroom was quiet. Eager. No one interrupted. They listened not out of pity, but presence. I didn't give them the scandal. I gave them the silence that followed it. I told them about the cost of loyalty when it's demanded instead of earned. I told them that no job is worth your name. I told them that grief never leaves, it just asks for space at your table. Afterward, a girl approached me. I used to think silence was strength, she said. But now I think maybe, speaking up is braver. I nodded. You're right, I told her. But both take courage. The question is, what are you silent for? And who benefits? That became my quiet mission. Not justice. Not legacy. Just peace. The kind that comes when you sit by the lake, the wind gentle, the past no longer heavy in your chest. When you can say your own name and not feel a wince behind it. Daniel White. It took me 30 years to reclaim those two words. Now I say them like a prayer. Not for what I lost. But for what I finally gave myself. A return. Not to who I was. But to who I had always been, underneath the weight of silence. I still remember the sound of gravel under tires. How it used to mean someone else's destination. Someone else's schedule. Someone else's life pulling away from the house while I watched, hands on the wheel, dreams folded small in the glove box. But not anymore. Now, I walk that same gravel path each morning, not to open a car door, but to greet the day. The wind no longer carries orders. It carries birdsong. The rhythm of my breath. The slow, steady steps of a man with nowhere urgent to be, and no truth left to silence. They built their lives on the back of mine. But I built something too. I built the quiet. Not the quiet of fear. The quiet of knowing. That I was right to speak. That justice, however delayed, still echoes. That a name, my name, matters. And if you're reading this, if you've ever been buried beneath the weight of someone else's comfort, I want you to remember. Silence is not peace. It's just the space where truth waits. And when you're ready, you'll feel it. Like breath before speech. Like light under a locked door. You'll find your voice again. And when you do, turn on the mic.